Hello and welcome. I'm Valerian Gauthier. I'm joining you from Paris on the invitation of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations to host a discussion on the moral blight that is child labor. Today is World Day Against Child Labor, a day that provides an opportunity for governments, organizations, and concerned citizens to promote actions that protect children and put an end to this human rights violation. Prior to the COVID-19 crisis, which can only worsen the situation, 152 million children were victims of child labor. 71%, which is about 108 million children, were working in agriculture. The situation is particularly challenging in Africa, where 1 child out of 5 is involved in child labor. Before starting our discussion, here's a video that outlines the plight of certain way too many children across the world. So that video sets up the problem we are about to discuss. Please know that since this video was produced, the percentage of children working in agriculture has gone up to 71%, worrying figures which we will now discuss with our guests. Firstly, let me introduce you to Bernd Schaefert, as he's in effect our host. Bernd is the focal point for addressing child labor at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Rome. Molly Namirembe joins us from Kampala in Uganda. Molly is a former child laborer. After her parents died, she had to leave school and work with her sister in a tea plantation in order to survive. Today, Molly works to help children in her country to get out of child labor. Jean-Marie Kagabo is coordinator of the Africa Desk on Child Labor at the International Labour Organization. He oversees projects in many countries, including Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Uganda, and Zambia. He holds a PhD in political science from the University of Zurich, Switzerland, and he is joining us from Geneva. Also joining us from Geneva is Sue Longley. She's the General Secretary of the International Union of Food, Agricultural, Hotel, Restaurant, Catering, Tobacco, and Allied Workers Associations, IUF for short. The IUF is the international trade union organization representing workers throughout the food chain. The union operates in 127 countries. And last, but by no means least, we are joined by the multi-award winning Lebanese director, actress, and activist Nadine Labaki. In late 2013, Nadine began work on her third film, Capernaum, meaning chaos, which won the Prix du Jury at the Cannes Film Festival in 2018. The film tells us the story of a 12-year-old boy living and working in the slums of Beirut. Thank you all for joining us. So first, I'd like to start by giving a clear definition of child labor with you, Bernd Schaefert from FAO. Can you define child labor and where do we find it today?
So according to the ILO convention, child labor refers to those work situations that engages children under the minimum age of employment. In most countries, that is the age 14 or 15. And it interferes with compulsory schooling as set in the country. Another criteria for defining child labor is to look at the condition. If the work that children undertake is hazardous or harmful, to them, then that would also be considered child labor. So hazardous child labor, for example, in agriculture would be carrying heavy weights, climbing high trees, being exposed to pesticides, working on a small fishing boat at night, or walking far away from the homestead under no supervision in a more dangerous environment. So this is what is referred to as child labor. At the same time, I think it's important to just mention that not all tasks, obviously, that children undertake is child labor. I think everybody who knows, who grows up on a farm and will know that it's part of normal upbringing to undertake certain tasks. And that is absolutely fine as long as this type of work is not hazardous and does not prevent the children to attend compulsory schooling. On the opposite, this kind of situation in many parts of the world, and in Africa also in particular, undertaking some task on and around the farm is helpful for the family, and it can help them to build knowledge and skills and can even contribute to their livelihoods. But it should not take place in these other forms that I've expressed. And indeed, coming to the second part of your question, the situation of child labor in agriculture is very severe. You have mentioned the numbers, and it remains a global problem in all regions of the world, but indeed in Africa, we find the highest concentration.
Molly Namirembe, as I was saying in the introduction, you have yourself been a child laborer. Can you talk about what happened to you? How did it start?
Growing up, I lived with my mother and my sister because my father died before I was even a year old. So we lived just the three of us at home, and we knew how life used to work out with our mother. She used to work on a tea plantation and fend for us. Unfortunately, on the 1st of March in 2005, my mother died, and we buried her. People were there for us, and they kept saying they are going to be there and take care of us and what. But after the burial, nobody came back. So it was just the two of us. I was 11 years then, and my sister was 13. The only thing we knew how to do was work on a tea plantation because that's where we had grown up from. That's what we had seen our mother do. So we went and asked for jobs. I personally, first of all, worked part-time because I was still in school, as my sister decided to drop out completely so she can collect more money to support me. I was able to stay in education until I finished primary 7, and that is the first level of education in Uganda. But after primary 7, I could not continue because the demands were high. We needed a lot of money for me to start in a new school, so I also dropped out so I can work full time. And in my thinking, I thought I was going to collect money and then probably join after some time. But this was not possible because the little money would collect they used to pay us about 1,000 shillings per basket that would carry. But this meant we would wake up very early in the morning. The way we pluck tea is you tie a basket around your chest and then whatever you pluck, you put in. So we had to go through a lot of carrying heavy stuff around our chests. And until now, I still live with back pain because I did it at an early age. When I finished primary 7 and dropped out, we worked together with my sister, but we couldn't still collect enough because we'd get little and we had to buy food, we had to pay for utilities at home, we had to do everything by ourselves. So it was around May in 2006 when I woke up and I used to copy notes from my friend. So one day I woke up and said, it's enough of the pity parties. It's now time that I wake up. But I didn't know what to do at that time. Though the only thing I knew is that probably my mother had a family or my father had a family, so would look out for such networks. I walked, there was a distance between where we lived and my mother's best friend's home, and I looked out for her, and she was able to reconnect me back to our family, and I was able to go back to school and study. But even when I went through school, my dream was to work with children because I knew what they were going through. So I said to myself, I'll dedicate my education to study what can help me work with the children, or something that can give me an opportunity to help children come out of child labor. And that's why I went for social work at the university, and I am now supporting other children to get out of child labor. There's pain that I still have because I know my sister did not go to school to complete. She dropped out at a very early age, and she stayed in work. She eventually got married at still a young age because she was not able to complete school. But also, it still hurts me that many of them are still going through a pain that I completely understand. And this is the motivation that I have every day to wake up, to do something, to support at least one or two, because I know what they are going through. I went through it, and I do not wish it for anyone in the world.
Jean-Marie Kagabo, can I now ask you, as the coordinator of the Africa Desk on Child Labor at the International Labour Organization, what has your experience been on the ground? What have you seen? And why did ILO choose to focus on this issue?
Thank you, Valeriane. We work in a number of countries, and what we have been seeing is that the very first thing to work on is legislation. Countries need to have laws in place, but most of them actually have done that with the support of the ILO and other organizations. The second thing is to put in place policy framework and institutions. So a number of countries have put that in place, but the problem with that is actually people move. So when people move, sometimes institutions die, and sometimes those institutions are in place because of a budget given by an organization. So it is important for government to fund those institutions. The other thing we have been doing is awareness raising, and that we have to continue to do it all the time to keep people reminding them about this issue. And we also work on research to inform policy. And we also work on livelihoods. When you have a concrete situation, what do you do to help the parents to get a better economic situation so as to put their children into school?
Sue Longley, so you're the General Secretary of the IUF. Why does the IUF want to tackle this issue, and why is it worsening due to the current COVID-19 crisis?
Oh, very tricky question. So as the global trade union responsible for workers throughout the food chain, we feel, and you put it well, that this is a moral abhorrence to most people. We have a moral duty to make sure that the products that our members are producing, whether it be food or beverages or whatever, is not produced with child labor. The IUF is committed to working with the ILO, with the other UN agencies, to ensure that this fundamental principle of no child labor is applied. And frankly, our members don't like to produce goods that are produced with child labor, whether it be cocoa, whether it be other food products. Yes, a lot of the child labor is on family farms, but a significant part is also in global supply chains and ending up on our plates. So we feel we have a duty to tackle this issue. I think, this is for me not the first time being on such a platform talking about this issue. And I think we remain very disappointed that globally we're seeing a rise in the number of kids working in agriculture. And we're concerned that with COVID-19, with the impact that's going to have on communities, there is quite a strong likelihood that child labor will increase. Kids will be coming onto the farms to replace maybe deceased grandparents or parents, very sadly. With the impact on incomes, we're also concerned that that will encourage child labor. So this is something we really think everybody needs to be working on now together.
Sue Longley, you're talking about a rise. So we've seen a rise in the figures. What do you think are the reasons for this figures going up?
I don't think there's one single cause. I think there's a lot of factors coming into play. We've seen in many countries very severe austerity programs that have cut back on things like access to public education. We've seen cuts in public services, and this we see more and more families pushed into poverty. And for us, poverty is the main driver of child labor. So it needs to be a global approach around ending global poverty, and that will be key, we think, to ensuring an end to child labor.
So my next question is for Bernd Schaefer. Bernd, can I ask you why does child labor still exist today? What are the main reasons for this?
Yes, I can only fully agree with what Sue was just mentioning from the IUF when referring to poverty. So the number one cause of child labor in agriculture is certainly household poverty. According to some by now a bit dated ILO data, more than 70% of all child labor is unpaid family work. And that very clearly puts to the point that it is family situations in where their parents have a form of an economic dependency on child labor. So they are poor, they may be hungry, they are maybe on the move in migration, they might have suffered from conflict, from natural disasters, maybe also from climate change caused situations of yet flooding or drought that pushed them even further into child labor. So household poverty is one of the core causes of child labor in agriculture that we observe. But of course, it is a much more complex problem. There are often no schools close by, or the school curriculum is not perceived as being relevant by the families. There's also the nature of agriculture being simply hazardous. There are so many hazardous tasks in agriculture. I mentioned pesticides before, but the list is very long, be it using heavy machinery or sharp tools. Even we've seen children use chainsaws in forestry. So there's a large number of underlying causes. Another one is the cultural perception that in some societies, child labor is simply perceived as a way of growing up. But once parents are more aware of the hazards, for example, and the long-term health consequences, but also on these lost opportunities of not sending their children to school, we can really make a difference. Once parents fully understand that their children are likely to remain poor in the future if they are child laborers, yet if they would have an education where they can learn maybe new agricultural practices, where they can make sure that their small farm business can continue working because they know how to market better, how to work better in producer organizations together, to gain better prices and to transport together and so on, then we see a difference. But yeah, it's a complex problem, but hunger and household poverty are the number one driver. And that's why I also think, and I think many of us will follow this thought, a labor law is very important, but a pure labor law enforcement approach does not work in this situation where workers and smallholder farmers really economically depend on this. So we need to address the root causes.
So we've pointed out that the situation is particularly challenging in Africa, but I also would like to talk about another country, Lebanon, where Nadine Labaki shot her film Capernaum, and it also inspired the story of this 12-year-old boy who has to go through child labor. Nadine Labaki, can I ask you, have people been more sensitive to this issue since your movie came out?
Yes, definitely. There has been this sort of debate about it. Of course, in the beginning, you tend to deny it. You tend to think, no, this is not happening in our country. But this is actually 2 minutes away from our lives and 3 minutes away from our lives. So it's, and it's like in every city in the world, this is not only a Lebanese problem. You know, every city in the world has those communities of invisible people who are left, you know, outside of the system, and a sort of a standby mode because systems cannot find solutions for them. So this is a problem I think every big city in the world is facing, those belts of misery that surround our societies and our lives. But of course, in Lebanon, in the beginning, there's a sort of a denial, but there's also huge debate about it, and with the revolution going on, and with the economical crisis increasing, with the COVID-19 also problem, is making the situation even more tangible, and people are more and more, of course, aware of the problem. I mean, now, unfortunately, half of the Lebanese population is living under poverty line. So you can understand how this problem is increasing more and more, and we truly need to find solutions.
Yes, so I think we all agree the COVID-19 crisis has made the situation worse for everyone. Molina Mirembe, perhaps can you talk a bit about the situation in Uganda? How is it currently regarding child labor? Has, in this case as well, the COVID-19 crisis made it worse?
In Uganda, I should say the problem of child labor currently, given the COVID-19 situation, is worse. And we expect it to get to the worst even after the pandemic. First of all, we had a partial lockdown in the country where schools were closed, but agriculture shops and plantations are still open and operating. So most of the children are now out of school, kept home, and it's a planting season. So they are now a source of free and cheap labor in their communities. I have been recently working with children in commemoration of World Day Against Child Labor to work on a magazine where we are going to be sharing children's messages. And one of the children wrote for me a message and drew a picture that said the schools are closed, but the plantations are open. Meaning now that's where they are keeping busy from. And we expect this to get worse because the poverty levels are increasing, parents are not earning anymore. So chances are high that even after the pandemic, when other sectors open up, children will be forced to go and join and work on supplementing family income. However, we have also seen the notion of it's a bit hard for communities to give a clear definition of what light work is and what child labor is. There is no distinction between the two. People do not know where to stop. So currently, that children are home with their parents. They do not know what kind of work should we give them to do to grow up as responsible citizens. So you find that even outside agriculture, children are doing a lot of domestic work because they are home. You find that they are children taking care of other children. Parents are leaving their responsibilities to children. Then the other thing that we have seen is the closure of markets and limitation of parents to participate in other sectors. For example, the marketing of agricultural products. Much as agricultural products are still on sale, like the bananas, the maize, and what, the adults are a bit not allowed to move out. So they are instead sending their children. Children are now becoming moving markets because they know even when the law enforcement officers find the children, they will feel a bit of, they will feel sorry for the children and may not punish them as they would punish adults. So when you walk on the streets, when you go to the market, children are vending food, children are selling bananas, children are on the streets. They cannot beg now because there's nobody to beg, but they are around selling whatever they can. We have also seen a challenge, especially at the border districts, where children are now used to support a movement of cargo through the porous borders. Because especially I've seen this in Busia, where children are supporting people living with disabilities to cross their goods, and then they are paid some little money. So we expect that much as the children, the levels are increasing currently because of the situation, they are even going to get worse when it's done and people are poor and have nothing to eat. However, we still encourage our government to support agriculture, especially at household level, because if families cannot access food after the pandemic, if they miss out on this planting season and do not participate, then more children are going to work in a bid to get food to support their households. So we need to create a balance in between.
Jean-Marie Kagabo, have you also noticed this? Have you noticed an increase in child labor due to the coronavirus crisis?
Yes, and the main issue is that children are not at school. So as a parent, what do you do with your own children? So the tendency is to take them with you in your work for what you could think as a light work, as Molly was saying. A light work is a work that is not harmful to the child. So that is left to the judgment of the parents. So what we are seeing now is now that children are not at school, some of them are even out selling masks without wearing themselves masks. So it's challenging, but at the same time, they are also sent by their parents to bring income at home. So it's a very big issue. What we advise is for when governments bring in this program to help the victims of the pandemic, to also integrate the child labor components into these programs.
So it seems you've all pointed out how important going to school is. I'd like to talk about finding solutions to eradicate child labor. Perhaps we can start with Bernd Schaefer. What is the FAO putting in place to tackle this issue?
Well, at FAO, we have over the last years taken a number of different approaches. So integrating child labor prevention in agricultural policies, for example, and in programs that the organization is organizing, be it poverty reduction, food security, or agricultural programs. So some of the particular opportunities that we as an agricultural actor have is, for example, to promote safe agricultural practices to prevent hazardous child labor. So instead of spraying pesticides, using alternative methods would be an example. Labor-saving technologies promotion is another area, and sometimes this can simply be a practice, thinking of a rural village, maybe in Africa, where 20 children are each herding 2 or 3 cows. This could be grouped, and you could employ somebody to a much larger group of cattle instead. And other examples are that we seek to improve our targeting, to not only, for example, look into food insecure households or into households that could be helped with agricultural extension, but in particular tailored in a way that households, families who make use of child labor or who are at risk of making use of them, that they get a particular preference for this kind of agricultural advisory support or inputs, or at times also cash support or income support, which is also in the COVID situation now in particular relevant. But at a larger scale also, what is important is that that we have a better collaboration. We all said before it's a complex problem, so we need the different sectors to work together: agriculture, education, health, even Ministry of Finance and infrastructure. And that's only talking at the government level. It of course goes much further. The producers' organizations, farmer organizations, working closely with workers' organizations and others, so that we can really tackle the problem from various ends. And this is what we have been doing, for example, bringing ministries of agriculture and labor together to jointly learn and to think through how can we apply labor legislations better in the rural economy, in the rural areas where that is often not done, or where there are no labor inspectors. So for example, training agricultural extension workers, labor inspectors together, so that they not only come to provide extension services or labor law enforcement, but work together on locally working solutions that are feasible for families. And yes, we in that regard have of course done also a lot of awareness raising, capacity development. I should mention e-learning courses that we have done together with the ILO for different agricultural stakeholders. But also what is important is that this is well coordinated at national level. So under the Secretariat of the ILO, there is the Alliance 8.7 that tries to bring together different stakeholders, but we still have a long way to go, I think. You know, not in all countries, the ministries of agriculture, for example, are are highly active, and that could be that really needs to improve. But from the FAO side, we just these days are publishing what we call the FAO framework for ending child labor in agriculture, and that is really on 100 pages experience what the different departments of FAO, the different work areas of agriculture can really contribute. And it's really quite impressive what we've learned over the years can be done. Now what we need to do is to scale this up, because most child labor initiatives now from civil society, from UN agencies, are very isolated small projects in limited geographic areas. But if we want to reach this global goal of ending all child labor, even by 25, like the world has promised, then we have to change speed, we have to change direction, we have to reach scale. So we need the more influential partners on board, like the development banks, let's say the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and others, but also the private sector, and large-scale programs in agriculture and food security, because they have the chance to really scale up their efforts. And there we still have a long way to go before we see a difference.
So Longley, what measures does the IUF recommend to put an end to child labor?
I really agree with what Bernd just said about the need to scale up. That is absolutely crucial, and about the policy coherence. But I think also we need to look more clearly at what we need to do to tackle what I think everybody agreed was the root cause, which was poverty. And for me, this means really making a fundamental shift in the power balance in the food supply chain. So small farmers, agricultural workers, those people, frankly, who feed the rest of us, have to have more power directly to be able to negotiate and to change their terms and conditions. We need more money going down the supply chain so that small farmers get a fair price for their product. We need more money going down the supply chain so that agricultural workers get decent wages and living conditions, so that none of them have to send their children out to work. So it's really, I think, the two things. It's the scaling up of the problems and the coordination, but it's also shifting the balance of power in the supply chain so that those who produce the actual food and the other products have really the power and influence to change their living and working conditions, and so that their kids don't have to go to work. Parents don't want to send their kids to work. They're obliged to do it. And we need to make sure that they have the power to change that. We're committed to helping them to do that.
Jean-Marie Kagabo, your organization, the ILO, works tirelessly on the elimination of child labor. What are the solutions that you would say are the most effective?
The most effective ones are those that try to address poverty. I can think, for instance, of cash transfer or any program where you link the requirement for parents to send children to school and the support you give to the parents. That's probably one of the most effective one, by establishing what can be called social protection flows. Because that's where, on one hand, you provide support to the parents, but at the same time, you put a requirement that they send children to school. So school and things that are related to school are the best avenue for combating child labor. Another way to go about it is awareness raising. We never do enough about awareness raising. Coming back to the issue that Molly was talking about or Bernd, about the perceptions of the parents and the families. For instance, in agriculture, in Africa, people do not necessarily see how harmful can be the work in agriculture. But you can think of so many things, snakes and those kind of things. But people tend to think that that's normal life. So one of the solutions, talking about awareness raising, is to provide evidence to the parents, to the farmers, on how work in agriculture is harmful to the health of the children. So that's an example about awareness raising. And I can go on and talk about different good practices that we have there that can be replicated.
Thank you. Nadine Labak, can I maybe ask you, from what you've seen, what do you think should be done to eradicate child labor? And perhaps would making education compulsory be a solution?
Definitely, like everyone has been saying, is tackling the poverty issue. That this is one of the main problems that we need to be facing. You know, if we don't solve poverty, I don't know if we will be able to solve it, but I don't know how in 2020 there are still people that are hungry around the world, where there are so many millions of tons of food waste every day. I mean, there's something that is not going the way it should. There should be other ways to tackle these problems, and systems should be able to find solutions. So, of course, tackling poverty is one of the problems, and one of the angles is, and also the access to free education. That is one of the most important things. You know, every child has the right to have an education, and has to have the same right as any other human being, whether rich or poor. We should all be able to have the access to education. And this is where it all starts. This is where you start building generations of children who are aware of their rights, can be beautiful citizens, and it's I think it's one of the most important angles that we need to be working on, is education, and finding solutions to the families, so that families are not don't have to be in that vicious circle, because unfortunately in those cases most of the time parents find it even easier for children to be the caretakers. Some children make more money than their own parents, especially in when we're talking about children who are on the streets, either begging or selling flowers. Or some children do make more money, and parents are a little bit sometimes more reliant on this, because children make more money. So it's this vicious circus that we have to tackle and get out of. I don't know. I don't have I don't have the answers, but I know that there the problem should be tackled from many different angles in order to get to that solution. And policy making is one of them. Children's rights convention, the UN Children's Rights Convention states that a child, as soon as they are born, they have the right to have an education, to have an identity, to the right nutrition, to the right affection, to the right. Unfortunately, in most of the cases, in most of the countries, there is no supervision when it comes to that. I mean, is this only ink on paper for us to have a clearer conscience? How do you apply all these articles in this convention, and are they really being applied? No child should ever find himself in this position. No child should ever, especially children that are under 15. I mean, it's completely unbearable to see a 4-year-old child or a 5-year-old child working, or carrying loads of, or carrying gallons of water, or carrying heavy bags to do the delivery. Or I mean, this is completely unacceptable. I don't know how the world is actually adapting to the situation. Like you were saying, I mean, we think it's part of life. Some people say, well, this is life. No, it's not life. We cannot be adapting to this situation. This is not part of life. This is a complete aberration. I don't know if you say it in English, aberration. And I think this is where we should not be adapting anymore to this situation.
Thank you, Nadine Lebeki. So as you were saying, so a lot of work still needs to be done to make people understand around the world that this is not a normal situation. Molina Mirembe, can I ask you, you now work in Uganda to put an end to child labor. What would you say should be the priorities to find effective solutions?
First of all, we have an immediate call to action given the situation of COVID-19. And in Uganda, we are saying that, we have categorized sectors into essential and non-essential in our country. And we are saying that the fight against child labor, the issue of child protection should be categorized as one of the essentials. And one of our asks currently that we're even pushing on the 12th of June today, where we are going to be celebrating World Against Child Labor nationally, we are saying that the probation and labor inspectors should be included among the essential workers during the situation of COVID-19. They should be facilitated to look out for these cases and manage them before they get to the worst, because we don't know for how long this situation is going to stay, and we cannot leave the children exploited until when the COVID-19 goes away. So that's one of the immediate actions that we want government to put into consideration now. But I also think that improving the livelihood of households is very key, because this is where the children come from. And when you look at households that are doing well financially, they are either participating in exploiting other children, but their children are not, in most cases, exploited. So how do we break the gap between those who have and those who do not have to improve the livelihoods of those who do not have, so that children do not fall victims? Because at the end of the day, when the household is not stable, it's the children who suffer. Then I would also like to emphasize the issue of area-based approach, because in most cases as civil society, we come up with projects that tackle maybe a given crop or maybe a given sector or what, but I think it's now time that we move onto the area-based approach. That if you are handling a district or a community, you handle it as a whole. Because the trend is that when you handle child labor in tea planting, the children will go away and go to rice farming. So how do we handle areas as an area and tackle the problem in an area-based approach than sector-based? And lastly, I would love to emphasize Mr. Kagabo's idea of awareness raising, where we reach out to the communities and put a clear distinction between what is light work and what is child labor. I remember growing up when I was working, communities used to applaud me instead. She's a strong person, she's going to be someone better. You see, she's supporting herself in school. And I think this is something that has to end immediately. How do we end it? Is we continue creating awareness and telling people that much as some of us manage to come out, it's still a bad vice. Lastly, let's create a generation of resilient children, because we want to fight child labor to end it, but it's not going to end today on the 12th of June 2020. There's still some time and a lot of effort that we have to do. But the children should know one of the key things that they should do is leaving school is not an option. Even when I was home working on the tea plantation, I knew my ultimate goal, why I had to work, was to go back to school. And every child needs to understand this. Even when I'm doing this now, what is supposed to be my ultimate goal? I am currently carrying a baby coming out soon. And I think one of the things that I want to do is to make sure that this child is resilient to all the conditions that I may never be able to fight and end in the world. And if every child can be able to do that, then probably later we can see a situation where there is no child labor.
Thank you, Molina Mirembe, and congratulations. Thank you all for joining us for this discussion. I would also like to thank the Food and Agriculture Organization for inviting us all to exchange on this very significant issue. Thank you, Bernd Schaefert from FAO. Thank you, Molina Mirembe, Jean-Marie Kagabo from the International Labour Organization, Sue Longley of the IUF, and Nadine Labaki, whose film Capernaum is a must-see, reminding us all once more that children forced into work is a moral blight on our civilization. On this World Day Against Child Labor, I urge all those watching to help bring an end to this human rights violation.